Week 6 is on tap for fantasy football. We're breaking down everything you guys need to know to set your fantasy football lineups in Week 6, going through all of the matchups, every single game, top 5 key matchups, over-unders, implied point totals, where the sharps are betting, everything we do over here on Matchups That Matter. I got a resounding, this format is better last week, so it looks like we are sticking with that, and we are going to kick things off right away. As a reminder, if you guys enjoyed at any point, leave a like, subscribe if you're new around here, all that good stuff. So, starting with Thursday Night Football, San Francisco 49ers at Seattle Seahawks. The 49ers are 3.5-point road favorites in this game, implied for 26.5 points, and the Seattle Seahawks implied for 23. This is a high-scoring game environment based on the Vegas totals here. We got a 49.5-point over-under, which is the third highest on the Week 6 slate. There is 4 teams on bye this week. There is 14 total games, 28 total teams in play, which is where all of these numbers are coming from, as I explained last week. 69% of the cash in this game is on the over, so it looks like the sharps are liking the over there. Pace of play is pretty high as well. Top 5 pace of play combined from the two offenses in this respective game, and it looks like the DVOAs for both offenses have a slight advantage. Moving into some key matchups that we need to pay attention to for this 49ers and Seahawks game tonight. Both quarterbacks have top 12 matchups, so if you need a streaming quarterback, Geno Smith and Brock Purdy are both very, very solid options. If you had to decide between the two of them, I would go with Brock Purdy because they are the favorite. They're implied for more points. Both run defenses are above average, so it might be tough sledding for Kenneth Walker and for Jordan Mason, although they should still be in your lineup because they are pretty much must-start running backs. The 49ers wide receivers, Ayuk, Deebo Samuel, and so on and so forth, they are in your lineup. They have a 21st best matchup on the slate at the wide receiver position there. The Seahawks wide receivers, not so much. DK Metcalf and JSN still probably in your lineup for the most part, but definitely on JSN specifically. Check if you have other options. George Kittle versus the Seahawks defense, also very, very good matchup for him tonight. So keep that in mind. And again, in any kind of high-scoring game environment, we always want to keep in mind that the kickers are in play if Jake Moody is healthy. And then, of course, Jason Myers, definitely a very good option if you're looking for one. Moving into the London game. We have another London game this week, so if you are on the West Coast, make sure you set your lineup Saturday night, or you get up at 6:30 a.m. before this one kicks off. Jaguars at Bears in the London Tottenham Stadium, or whatever they play in. Bears are minus 2-point favorites, 23.25 implied point total for them. 44.5-point over-under, about an average matchup in terms of over-under on the slate. Over catching a lot of the steam, though, 77% of the cash. The pace of play also very, very high, so keep that in mind. The DVOA of the two offenses aren't great, but at the same time, both of the Bears and the Jaguars offense are playing their best ball right now. We just saw the Bears have the best game of the season on offense that they've had. We just saw the Jaguars have the best game of the season on offense that they just had as well. So both of these offenses could put up more points than we're maybe thinking based on the numbers. Key matchups to pay attention to. Caleb Williams, the easiest matchup of any quarterback on the entire slate. 32nd ranked pass defense against fantasy QBs are the Jaguars. So if you need a fantasy quarterback this week, definitely a good streaming option. Speaking of like Purdy and Geno and those type of guys, I think you could put Caleb Williams right into that conversation. I personally would prefer Purdy, but it would be pretty close. Trevor Lawrence, however, you probably want to leave on your bench because the Bears are actually the best defense in the NFL against the fantasy quarterback position. Same goes for the wide receiver position. Brian Thomas Jr., Christian Kirk, going to be tough sledding for those guys. DJ Moore and Romo Dunze, however, do have the easiest matchup of any wide receiver tandem in the league this week, and the Jags run defense, just basically the Jags can't stop anything, and DeAndre Swift also a great matchup this week. So I do actually really, really like the Bears to cover that minus 2 points and them to probably win this game. Cardinals at Packers, the first game of the 1 p.m. slate. We have 7 1 p.m. games and 3 4 p.m. games this week. Cardinals at Packers, the first one that we have. Packers are minus 5.5-point favorites, over-under of 47.5, which is a top 5 mark on the slate. Also, the fastest paced game on the entire slate in the Green Bay DVOA advantage that they have for Green Bay's offense against the Arizona Cardinals defense, which is how these DVOA matchups work. The Green Bay offense at a big, big time advantage there. Some of the key matchups we want to look towards for this game: Jordan Love versus the Arizona Cardinals defense, very good matchup. He definitely should be in your lineup as a top 5 quarterback. Both running backs have below average matchups, so with James Conner, with Josh Jacobs, keep in mind they might underperform this week. Marvin Harrison is expected to see shadow coverage from Jair Alexander. He's been a little up and down this year, but Marvin is a rookie, so keep that in mind. That might downgrade his outlook this week. Jaden Reed and Dontavian Wicks both have top 10 matchups on the outside for the wide receiver position. And if you go to fantasy points, they have wide receiver cornerback matchups over there. And Jaden Reed, the single easiest matchup in the slot against the slot corner of the Arizona Cardinals of any wide receiver on the entire slate. So he has a big chance to have a monster game in this one. And then both tight ends, Tucker Kraft and Trey McBride, are going to be top 6 options for me this week. They both have above average matchups as well. Moving into the Browns at Eagles game, weird spread here. Minus 9.5 point favorites are the Eagles. Kind of feels like a trap line a little bit. I know the Browns have been bad, but that is a big spread for the NFL. 26 implied points there, over-under of 42.5. Pretty, ho-hum game environment other than the Philadelphia DVOA being a top 10 mark on the slate. There's not a whole lot to get excited about from a fantasy perspective in this game. Both quarterbacks have average matchups. Of course, Jalen Hurts will be in your lineup, and nobody's starting Deshaun Watson. Saquon Barkley versus the Browns' run defense is a pretty good matchup there. They are the type of defense you want to run against and not pass against, evidenced by the fact that A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith have the 7th hardest matchup on the slate for fantasy wide receivers. Amari Cooper versus the Philadelphia secondary is one of the easiest matchups out there as well. 32nd in adjusted fantasy points allowed to the wide receiver position. And then the Eagles defense, if you guys are looking for a streamer this week, 9.5 point home favorites against Deshaun Watson. He's been rather up and down, to say the least, if not just straight up down this season. They are definitely a very good streaming defense. And even if Jameis comes in, we know Jameis is capable of throwing some picks and that kind of thing. So Commanders at Ravens, the next game we're going to talk about here. 6.5 point favorites for the Baltimore Ravens, implied for the single most points on the entire slate with 29 of them. A 51.5 point over-under on this game, which is second highest of any total on the slate. And the Baltimore Ravens DVOA advantage is the highest of any team going up against the Commanders defense, which is very bad, but the Baltimore Ravens defense very good. And then the Commanders also have a pretty good matchup too, because the Ravens defense has not been very strong so far this year either. When you look at the key matchups in this one, both quarterbacks are obviously their top 3 quarterbacks this week. Both of them have top 10 matchups. Derrick Henry versus the Washington run defense, 25th easiest matchup there. And then we also have Brian Robinson versus the Baltimore Ravens run defense, which is a tough matchup. They're the 6th best against fantasy running backs. Both wide receiver cores, elite matchups as well. You're starting Terry McLaurin, you're starting Zay Flowers. Those guys are in very good spots to perform this week. And then if you're looking for streamers from this game, I think the defenses I'd probably stay away from given the over-under, but I do like Zach Ertz as a streamer if you need a tight end this week. Maybe you have somebody on bye, Travis Kelce or whoever else that is on bye this week. And then both kickers are definitely in play given the over-under of this game as well. And again, I guess you could stream the Ravens tight ends, whether it's Andrews or Likely, but I would probably steer clear of them given the up and down split that we've seen between those two guys. Likely would be my preference of the two. Steelers at Raiders, another 1 p.m. game here. Steelers are 3-point favorites in this one. Bad game environment, 13th highest over-under on the slate at just 36.5. Not a very good game to, be firing up a lot of fantasy production. The Pittsburgh DVOA matchup is pretty solid because the Steelers have been okay on offense as far as, on average relative to the average offense. That's how DVOA is measured. And then the Raiders are not a very good defense. We will get Aiden O'Connell actually starting in this game for the Las Vegas Raiders, so that's an interesting wrinkle to keep in mind. Some of the key matchups that we want to pay attention to: Justin Fields, very good streamer this week. Las Vegas defense, 24th against the pass here. So between Brock Purdy, Geno Smith, Justin Fields, Caleb Williams, there's a lot of good streaming quarterbacks. I'll talk about Daniel Jones a little bit later too. If you guys do have Mahomes or whoever else on bye, there is definitely a lot of great options this week. Jacoby Myers is expected to see shadow coverage versus Joey Porter because Devontae Adams is expected to be out yet again, presumably because he's holding out until he gets traded, or he actually has a hamstring injury. I don't exactly know at this point. But Jacoby Myers saw the Patrick Surtain treatment last week, and it looks like he will see the Joey Porter treatment this week. Both running backs have above average matchups, so you can definitely fire up Alexander Mattison and Najee Harris as like RB3s or back-end RB2s at absolute best. And then George Pickens versus the Las Vegas secondary is also a very good matchup for him. And if you want to stream the tight end position, obviously Bowers is in your lineup every single week for the Raiders, but Pat Freiermuth also a premier streamer this week. If you guys are looking for a tight end, I think he's probably one of the best options out there. Looking at the Texans at the New England Patriots here. The Texans are minus 7-point road favorites in Drake May's first official start. It was announced a couple days ago that Jacoby Brissett will be riding the bench. Drake May will be starting at quarterback. Now, definitely don't get too cute and mess around with Drake May this week, but it is encouraging knowing that maybe Jalen Polk, Javon Baker, Demario Douglas, whatever guys that you're excited about on the Patriots, these young players, even Hunter Henry, or some of the running backs, if Drake May is the quarterback prospect that we all thought he was the third overall pick in the draft, there's a chance that he elevates this offense into a much better stat, but it is a tough matchup that he's going up against here. The Texans defense is very, very strong. The over-under is pretty low, 38-point over-under. The Sharps like the over in this one, but the New England Patriots have the worst DVOA matchup from their offense versus the Texans defense. Again, keep in mind that Jacoby Brissett has been starting the whole year, and maybe Drake May elevates this thing, but pretty tough ask for a rookie quarterback. Both QBs have below average matchups. You're probably still starting CJ Stroud regardless. Both running backs have bad matchups as well. It appears Joe Mixon was seen at practice today, so he could be back for this game. If he is playing, he's obviously in your lineup. If he is not playing, then Cam Akers is definitely a viable, RB2, RB3 flex option. New England Patriots running back core, we heard last week that Ramondre Stevenson was going to get benched, and even though Antonio Gibson started the game, quote unquote, Stevenson was still the guy who ended up getting the fantasy production, even though the snap share was a lot more even split. So keep an eye on that for sure. Both tight ends have bottom 10 matchups, so if you probably could find some better options than Hunter Henry and Dalton Schultz this week, although Dalton Schultz without Nico Collins and Stephon Diggs expected to see shadow coverage from Christian Gonzalez. That could open up some touches for Dalton Schultz if you guys are looking for a tight end. And then if you want to stream the Texans defense and kicker, I think they are obviously very good. Fairbairn probably highly owned in your league, but the Texans defense definitely a very good option this week. Colts at Titans, another game that we're going to go over here from the 1 p.m. slate. The over catching a big amount of steam in this game, and it's a 43-point total, but over of 83%. The Colts and Titans, both of these teams have generally invited high-scoring game environments, and the pace of play is top 5 on the entire slate as well. So both of these teams kind of interesting. Titans 2.5-point home favorites in this one. Key matchups to look out for. Again, I would not mess around with Will Levis. I don't think you should be that desperate unless it's a super flex league. But the Indianapolis defense is pretty bad, which is good news for the Titans pass catchers. Calvin Ridley has a top 11 matchup or so among the Indianapolis secondary. They're not good on the back end, so I feel like he's going to be a pretty good option this week. Both running backs have a top 10 matchup, so you can fire up Jonathan Taylor if he's there. If he's not starting, then Trey Sermon is definitely a viable fill-in. And then, of course, Tony Pollard has been a pretty solid option all season. Sit Anthony Richardson. There's no reason to play him because not only is Michael Pittman probably out for this game and apparently a candidate to go on IR, it sounds like Josh Downs is also banged up as well, and maybe he's a candidate to miss this game as well. And then you're looking at Adonai Mitchell and Alec Pierce. Make sure Adonai Mitchell is rostered in your league. Definitely go and pick him up if he's available, and maybe Alec Pierce as well if both guys end up being out. But I'm not starting Anthony Richardson in this game. Definitely not, especially coming off of the injury. He's still going to be a little banged up. Maybe he's hesitant to run, not going to have many receivers. Not a great situation for him. And then if you are looking for some defense and kicker streamers, I think both Matt Gay and the Colts defense are pretty good options because Will Levis is, a turnover machine and always has a bonehead play per game. And maybe that goes back for the 6 points for the other way for your fantasy defense. So Buccaneers at Saints. I cannot believe I have gone this far in the video without saying happy fuck the Saints week. Go Bucs. We are going to take this one down. Hopefully, I will say I'm very nervous as a Buccaneers fan because we have this tendency to make rookie quarterbacks look like, God, and Spencer Rattler's probably going to go out there and have like a monster game because we saw what Bo Nix did a couple weeks ago. Everybody probably remembers Daniel Jones' infamous, debut against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Mitch Trubisky had a monster game as a rookie against the Buccaneers. We're just scarred from rookie quarterbacks. So I'm a little bit worried about Spencer Rattler getting the start here. Overall, this is not a great game environment. Low over under. Sharps don't really love the over as much as the other games. The pace of play is the lowest on the entire slate as well. In terms of key matchups, we already know it's coming. Get your popcorn ready because Mike Evans versus Marshawn Lattimore is absolutely going to happen. We know that Lattimore has, I would say, had his number, even though that disgusts me to say as a Buccaneers fan. Mike Evans definitely gotten some of his big plays off of Lattimore, but Lattimore generally, if you look at the course sample size of their whole careers, has generally been able to take him away, more often than not. Both run defenses are top 10 in the NFL, so tough sledding for Rachaad White, Bucky Irving, and Alvin Kamara on the ground. Baker Mayfield, probably a guy you don't want to start this week. The Saints defense is pretty strong. Even though I think the Buccaneers can win this game, I don't know if it's necessarily going to be a point bonanza. Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed are in pretty good matchups against the Buccaneers secondary, although they might be getting Antoine Winfield Jr. back on the back end, which would be a huge, huge help for that secondary. And then if you're looking for streamers in this game, I think there's a couple good ones. The Buccaneers defense against a rookie quarterback, again, I know I'm scarred from it, but generally speaking, it's a good process to play the defense against a turnover-prone quarterback like Spencer Rattler. At least he was a turnover-prone quarterback early in his college career. And then Cade Otton, if you're looking for a tight end, I think is a not a bad option. I would definitely, pick him up over like Hunter Henry or even potentially Dalton Schultz. And then Chase McLaughlin, the Buccaneers kicker, and Blake Grupe, the Saints kicker, are both pretty good options in this game as well. It strikes me that there's going to be a lot of field goals in this one. So moving into the 4 p.m. window, I believe we have the Chargers at Broncos. Indeed, the first 4 p.m. game on the slate. The Chargers are 3-point road favorites against the Broncos, which is interesting because the Broncos are 3-2 and Mile High is a tough place to play. Lowest over-under of any game on the slate, so this one's not appealing from a fantasy perspective, although the sharps seem to think that this line might be set a little bit too low, the second most money on the over of any game on the entire slate. Quentin Johnston is expected to see shadow coverage from Patrick Surtain, so leave him on your bench. Definitely don't mess around with him. Maybe a slight upgrade to Ladd McConkey because of that, but at the same time, the other corners on the Broncos are still very good. It's not just Patrick Surtain that's having a good season. Riley Moss and some of the other guys there are having pretty good years. Both wide receiver cores have bottom 5 matchups, so again, if you don't have to play Cortland Sutton or Ladd McConkey, I probably wouldn't. Both running backs have bottom 10 matchups, so if you don't have to play Javonte Williams, I probably wouldn't. J.K. Dobbins definitely going to be higher in my rankings, but if you don't have to play him, you definitely don't have to. And then both quarterbacks also bottom 5 matchups. Don't mess around with Justin Herbert or Bo Nix. Really, the only person that you absolutely need to play in this game is the Broncos defense, because the Broncos are the home team, even though they're underdogs, and the Chargers defense maybe you could play as well. Just as this is the type of game environment, it's super low scoring, potential for, a 10-7 type of game. These are the types of games that you want to be playing defenses in, whether it's the Chargers because they're the favorite or the Broncos because they're the home team and they have a chance, and they've just been a really good defense in general this season. So not a good fantasy matchup, like I said, that Broncos and Chargers game. Lions and Cowboys, a lot more fantasy matchup friendly here. We have the Lions favored by 3 points on the road going to Dallas, and then they have the highest over-under on the entire slate on this game, 52 points, highest of the slate, 78% of the money on the over to go with that, and the pace of play is, relatively high there, 8th highest on the slate, as well as the DVOA for the Detroit offense versus the Dallas defense. That is 3rd highest on the slate, given how banged up the Cowboys have been on defense. So key matchups to pay attention to. David Montgomery, Jahmyr Gibbs, they're going to have a field day against this Dallas run defense. Other than Devin Singletary, they have not been able to stop anybody, and Devin Singletary is Devin Singletary. So there's a very good chance that they could have a big day. Rico Dowdle, on the other hand, probably will not have a big day because the Lions are very good against the run. CeeDee Lamb and Jalen Tolbert are probably the way that the Cowboys move the ball on offense. So they're very good plays this week as, top 40 receivers. Of course, CeeDee Lamb is an elite guy, but even Jalen Tolbert had a good week last week and definitely is a viable flex play this week. Both tight ends have bottom 12 matchups, so it could be tough sledding for Sam Laporta and Jake Ferguson in this game. But again, the over-under is so high that you're just playing everybody and anybody in this game. And then both quarterbacks have league average matchups as well. So if you want to play Jared Goff, Dak Prescott, I think they're definitely great plays. Given the high-scoring nature of this one, of the two of them, I would definitely play Prescott because of the tough matchup on the ground for Rico Dowdle. They're probably going to have to throw the ball if they want to win this game. So moving into the Falcons at Panthers, another one of these NFC South showdowns. We got 2 of them this week with the Saints Buccaneers and the Falcons Panthers. Falcons minus 6-point favorites on the road going to Carolina. 47-point over-under, so a pretty high one. Over is catching some steam, but not a whole lot. The pace of play, 2nd highest on the slate, and the Falcons offense has really turned it around the last couple of days, last couple of games, and they have the 8th highest advantage on the slate. Some of the key matchups to pay attention to, we do have shadow coverage in store for Deontay Johnson on A.J. Terrell. Probably the premier quarterback streamer on the entire slate is Kirk Cousins because this matchup is just so juicy for him. I am personally picking him up in the Flock League. I already did, and he is going to be my streaming quarterback. I picked him up over Geno Smith, over Caleb Williams, over some of the other options, Daniel Jones, who I'll talk about in a second. So I think Kirk Cousins is an awesome streamer this week. week. We saw what he did last week on Thursday Night Football. Panthers defense is just as bad as the Buccaneers was on Thursday night. Bijan Robinson going up against the 31st ranked run defense in the NFL. If he does not have a good game this week, I don't know when he ever will, but this one should be set up so that if you are looking for a running back to add to your team and you're 4-1 and you're 5-0 or something like that, go buy Bijan now before this game, because there's a very good chance he's going to have a great performance and he's going to be a lot more expensive after this game as opposed to before this game. Chuba Hubbard, not a good matchup, conversely. I don't think he's an absolute must start. He is getting the workload, of course, but if you have better options, I definitely don't blame you for maybe sitting him. Both wide receiver cores are in really good spots with top 12 matchups aside from Deontay Johnson. And again, are you going to really start Xavier Legette in this game? Maybe, but probably more so as a low-end flex play. Drake London, of course, definitely in your lineup, and Darnell Mooney probably in your lineup as well, given how he has performed the last couple of games. So Sunday Night Football, Bengals at Giants. Pretty interesting Sunday Night Football game. We do have a couple injury concerns on the Giants side of things. We have not seen Malik Neighbors clear the concussion protocol yet, and that is not a guarantee given the fact that he did not practice yet again today, hasn't cleared it yet, so he's going to need to clear it tomorrow in order to be able to play in this game, and that's definitely still up in the air. The Bengals right now are 3.5-point road favorites. The over-under is 48 points, and the Bengals DVOA is fourth highest on the slate. It looks like this one is setting up pretty well for the Bengals to get to 2-4 after a terrible start in the record category. Daniel Jones, also a pretty solid streaming quarterback, although without Malik Neighbors, if he doesn't play in this game, probably not nearly as good of a play. Bengals defense, though, is very bad, 29th against fantasy QBs. Malik Neighbors, should he play? And Wan'Dale Robinson, even if he is not playing. Cincinnati's secondary is really bad, so they are in a pretty good spot there. T. Higgins is expected to see shadow coverage from Deonte Banks, who had a good week last week, but generally speaking, not a corner I'd be overly scared of. So T. Higgins probably going to be just fine. Both running backs have league average matchups, so you could probably fire up whatever running back on the Bengals you feel comfortable firing up. I mean, Chase Brown and Zach Moss have been pretty much splitting the work these days. And then the New York Giants backfield, Devin Singletary, if he plays, will be the lead back there, but it's possible he's out yet again, and Tyrone Tracy is up, and he would be a good play against the Cincinnati Bengals. And then Joe Burrow, probably not a sit, because I think it's still just a pretty decent spot for them to get right in this one. But he does have a relatively difficult matchup against the Giants secondary. They've been pretty good against fantasy quarterbacks, so keep that in mind if you have Joe Burrow. Final game on the slate, we have the Bills at the New York Jets. The Bills are 2.5-point favorites on the road going to New York, a game in which they just fired their coach. So maybe we see a little bit of a bump playing a little bit harder from the Jets offense, especially because they also just made Todd Downing their new play caller and demoted Nathaniel Hackett. So this one will be really interesting to see what the Jets offense looks like without Nathaniel Hackett calling the plays, what the defense looks like without Robert Saleh calling the plays, and also just the scheme and the vibe around this team. Maybe it's a lot better. Maybe I'm just spitballing and I'm coping for my Breece Hall and Garrett Wilson bags, but I think it probably will end up being better and actually like the Jets to win this game. Not too interesting in terms of a fantasy matchup, 41-point over-under, 69% of the cash on the over, so ho-hum, kind of so on and so forth. But the key matchups to pay attention to, Breece Hall has the easiest matchup of any running back on the entire slate. So Breece Hall, just like Bijan Robinson, I talked about it on my TikTok. I said this week, the Week 6 trade targets of Bijan Robinson and Breece Hall might be the biggest cornerstone trade targets of the entire season, because you can get two elite running backs for non-elite price tags right now because people are panicked. And I already know me saying that will have a bunch of people in the comments saying Bijan's dust and Breece Hall's dust. I'm telling you right now, they're about to get right in these two games. They have the easiest two matchups in the entire league for the running back position. Breece Hall definitely get a feast against this Bills run defense. Both quarterbacks, not great matchups for Allen and for Aaron Rodgers. James Cook, who's banged up right now and not practicing, so definitely go and pick up Ray Davis or Ty Johnson, whatever one you're leaning towards. I tend to think it'll be Ray Davis because he's more of like the early down guy. But at the same time, we'll have to wait and see. If James Cook is not active for this game, then Ray Davis is definitely going to be like a top 24 play. But it is a bad matchup against the Jets' run defense. Both wide receiver cores have bottom 5 matchups, so don't feel great about Khalil Shakir, also not practicing. Don't feel great about Garrett Wilson. Don't feel great about Keon Coleman. Garrett Wilson most likely going to be in your lineup, given how many targets he commands, but not a good matchup for him against the Bills' secondary. And then both tight ends also have bottom 10 matchups, so I don't think I would mess around with Tyler Conklin, and then Dalton Kincaid even. Definitely something you want to probably take into account, maybe downgrade him a little bit if you have better options. So this was the matchups that matter. I went through every single game, talked about some of my biggest matchups that I'm looking for. Again, if you guys are looking for streaming quarterbacks, I think Kirk Cousins is the best guy available this week if you have Mahomes on bye or whoever else you might have on bye. If Kirk Cousins is not available, I really like Brock Purdy. If Brock Purdy's not available, go after Geno Smith. If Geno Smith is not available, Caleb Williams, Daniel Jones. Some of those guys are good options if you need a streaming quarterback. If you need a tight end, of course, I talked about Pat Freiermuth is a good streaming option. I think he's the best one this week. I also like Kate Otten as a streaming option this week, and I think Dalton Schultz with Diggs in shadow coverage with Nico out for the game, he's a decent streaming option as well. Again, I talked about a bunch of streaming defenses throughout this video, but I like the Colts against Will Levis. I like the Buccaneers against Spencer Rattler. There's a number of different ones that I liked as well. Denver Broncos in that low-scoring game. Definitely go back and just check them out if you guys are needing streamers, but I figured I'd rattle off a couple rapid fire at the end because some of you guys mentioned you'd like that. You'd liked if I did that at the end of these videos. So if you did enjoy this, leave a like down below, subscribe to the channel if you guys are new around here. If you want all of my matchup charts, all the information from this video came from my matchup charts, which are available over on flockfantasy.com. Use the promo code FSE when you sign up for 7 days for free, 30% off any of the packages, and 6 months for free when you sign up annually. You can also get access to our weekly rankings and our matchup charts and our Vegas information, all the stuff that I use for this video, by going to underdogfantasy.com. Shout out for the shirt that they sent me for max entering BBM4 last year. Go to underdogfantasy.com, use the promo code FSE when you sign up, and when you sign up and deposit at least $10, within 24 hours, you will be given our weekly start-sit rankings for the rest of the season, so you can help set your lineups every single week, look at who has a good matchup, who has a bad matchup, what's the Vegas information telling you. You can make your own informed decisions, and that is something that you get for free when you use promo code FSE on Underdog Fantasy, and also, like I said, it is available on flockfantasy.com right now, which also has our rest of season rankings and our dynasty rankings now up to date if you're interested in that. So with that being said, peace out, and we'll talk to you soon.